I'm going to go ahead and start. Welcome to our second spring roundtable for the environment program here at Loyola. We're happy to, thank you for the clapping, Sophia. We're excited to have one of our own this week. Dr. Christopher Torres has joined us from Florida. He focuses generally on practical knowledge for policymakers and bridging the gap between applied and academic research. Specialization is actually, he is joint with us with criminology, but we know there are many environmental factors related to crime, particularly here in Louisiana. His primary area of expertise is in geographic information systems, that's the GIS, multi-level modeling, and quantitative research design. And what he's here to talk to us about today, which is really exciting, is resilience by design, why the where matters in building our safer communities. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Torres.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out today. Be talking about why where matters. Where is a really important element in all things that we study and anything that you could possibly be looking into and researching here at Loyola. Today I've got some presentation things that I want to walk through with you, but also I'm going to actively open up the geographic information systems that we work with here at Loyola to sort of showcase how user-friendly this application is now. Okay, about even just 6-7 years ago when I was first learning how to do GIS, it was not user-friendly. It was very difficult, and if you didn't know how to code or do fancy things like that, you were really limited. So Esri, which is the company that creates ArcGIS Pro, which is a software that we use here at Loyola, is much more user-friendly now and web-based. So we can access all of these much more complex applications and things like that, and much more complicated job skills that are pretty much put at your fingertips that maybe 5 years ago, 4 years ago, were locked behind knowledge on coding. Also, one quick note, I am dying of allergies, so if I have to step out to blow my nose for a second, I'm very sorry, but I am trying to hold it together if you can't hear it in my nose. It's like, I go into these sneezing fits, but I just took a bunch of medicine, so hopefully that's going to hold me off. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here, and I just want to start by saying that every social problem that we address has an address, okay? So I wrote a little bit of something here that I'm going to read directly to you just to get started, and so we can start talking about the concept of where. So today doesn't have any specific focus when we talk about safety and safer communities, because there's a lot of different definitions of safety. So I'm going to talk to you, give you some definitions, and then we're going to work together and have a little conversation in the middle of this presentation and talk about some problems here in New Orleans that we would want to address or something like that. And then we can talk about how geographic information systems can help us focus in on the where element and how we can make a bigger, more direct impact. So every challenge that societies struggle to understand, whether it's crime, poverty, environmental degradation, public health disparities, or access to opportunity, exists somewhere in physical space. So another thing that I want to point out that's very important in this presentation and in this roundtable is that geographic information systems and honestly applied geography is extremely multidisciplinary. I'm in criminology, probably should have introduced myself, but I am in criminology, and crime and crime mapping and crime analysis are not the only domains that GIS focuses on here at Loyola. I actually keep it very open and broad to the social problems, whether they're in environmental sciences, environmental studies, criminology, sociology, concepts of environmental justice, right? They are very broad. So these issues do not float abstractly in the air as disconnected ideas. They unfold in neighborhoods, along streets, within communities, and across landscapes shaped by history, infrastructure, and human decision-making. In other words, every social problem, again, has an address. When we begin to ask not only what is happening, but also where it is happening, patterns begin to emerge that were previously invisible. We start to see that crime clusters along particular corridors, that environmental hazards disproportionately burden certain neighborhoods, that access to healthcare or healthy food is unevenly distributed across cities, and that geography of opportunity is rarely random. And when I say the geography of opportunity is rarely random, we're talking about decision making when it comes to enriching communities, but also the negative opportunities when it comes to crime and things like that. So these spatial patterns tell powerful stories about the systems that really shape our lives. So geographic information systems, which I'm going to refer to as GIS through the rest of today, allow us to uncover these stories by connecting data to place. GIS transforms abstract statistics into living landscapes of information, revealing the relationships between environment, infrastructure, policy, and human behavior. A spreadsheet might show numbers, but a map shows meaning. And something that I am going to talk to you a little bit about today too is that GIS isn't only about maps. It is also about creating custom data sets from scratch to test maybe hypotheses that you have from a scientific lens, or to just describe a little bit more about how resources are allocated throughout where you're studying. The city, within neighborhoods, and we'll get into that breakdown in a little bit. It allows us to see how forces interact across space and how the built environment influences the outcomes communities experience. When we understand where problems occur, we gain the ability to design solutions that are grounded in reality rather than guesswork. So we all learn how to do and address problems here at Loyola, but we don't want to guess about it. We want to know where the problems are dispersed throughout our problem area, right? Again, focusing on that concept of where. We can identify vulnerable communities before disaster strikes, allocate resources more effectively, and uncover inequalities that might otherwise remain hidden beneath aggregated data, which means data that's clustered together, and flowery problem statements. In this way, geography becomes more than a backdrop. It becomes a tool for action. Ultimately, the power of spatial thinking lies in its ability to transform questions into insight, and insight into solution. We always want to take action when we're hypothesizing and testing things and illuminating problems. So by recognizing that every social problem has an address, we begin to see that the path towards safer, healthier, and more resilient communities starts with understanding the landscape in which those problems live. So, moving forward, I know that's a lot, but that was just sort of an introduction. I kind of want to define what geographic information systems, GIS, are. And they're loosely defined as a database system that can process, visualize, and analyze different types of geographic data. It's basically, for you, an interactive canvas that allows you to manipulate and study the space around you, okay? This is really important because I don't want you to think or hear of all these fancy words we're saying when it comes to applied geography and get intimidated on how to learn it, or to come to the class, or to just expand your own research horizons. It is literally an interactive canvas now. It looks like Google Maps. All of the tools are super easy to click. So that is sort of the overarching theme of this talk as well, is that it's very accessible to you, right? So in order to build safer communities, we need to operationalize the communities themselves. So this is where we really start to focus in on why the where is important. So I want to start opening it because this is a roundtable discussion here. I want to hear how you would define a safe community. Does anybody want to define that? Anyone at all want to take a shot? Go ahead.
I'd say in what I've experienced, there's three. The first one would be the place you are in, or where you're born from. Because it depends on where you sorry. It depends on how you perceive as a community, as something that's livable, someone that you can come to, or either a community just to get away from reality. And I'd say another one would as well be the resources that they have, because sometimes a good community does not always have the resources that are available, but even without the resources, they give you more options. And I'd say three, their ulterior motive as a college or a business, what's their main focus on the motives.
Okay. So focus. All right. So we have three examples here on how we would define a safe community. Anybody else want to add to that?
I don't have necessarily like a statement, but rather one word that just keeps coming to my mind is reliable.
Okay.
Just being able to rely on people in your community, being able to rely on your resources, the things that you can just like when you feel like you can rely on something. I feel like that's a sense of safety.
Okay.
In your community.
Wonderful.
To add to everything said, I would say a place that allows the space for establishment and expression is like somewhat regulated.
Okay. Okay. So like sort of like having sort of an umbrella of freedom of expression. Okay. Let's put this is more notes for me then. Okay. So perfect. Yeah.
This is funny. I love like all of these. And my first one was like, I remember feeling unsafe where I lived when I felt like I couldn't get my groceries into my house and get a kid out of a car seat at the same time. Like that was, my version of safe was very physical.
Mm-hmm.
You all had these beautiful emotional, but I was just thinking
But safe can also mean physical as well. Like, so you know how like some people express themselves like hugging or like contact, like a handshake or like a hug.
Or
That's
cradle
like another,
them up.
that's another type of physical that's safe.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing that came to my mind is like, is it a naturally safe environment?
Okay. And what do you mean by naturally safe? Like environmental things? Like.
Is there environmental problems that the community can face? And do they have the resources to face them, and are they prepared for it?
Okay, good. Hold on to that for the next part of this question. That's good. Okay, yeah.
I was just gonna say care for the environment, like even things like the sidewalks are regularly cleaned or upkept, like if there's trash anywhere, like people caring and taking care and respecting the space.
Sure, that's perfect. So I think the overarching sort of message that's being conveyed here is that safety is very relative to a lot of people, but it's also very multidimensional. I think everybody can kind of agree on the concept of like physical safety and resources and perceptions, right? So in criminology, we call like the perception of safety sort of as awareness spaces. So as you travel through New Orleans, when you go from the CBD to the Lower Garden District to uptown to all over the place, like you know you're changing neighborhoods, and that's a shift in your awareness space. Those same feelings are going to happen when you walk by a dark alley, or when you walk and street lights go out and you feel unsafe, or groceries in the car, you know, and getting a kid out of the car. You might be worried about your physical safety. That's where everyone's mind usually goes right off the bat, but it is very multidimensional, right? So today, I'm kind of focusing in a little bit more on how we can use the concept of where to really hone in and address all at once many multifaceted definitions of safety. Is there anything anyone else would like to add? Yeah.
I also think like a safe community is like, is there actually a community that exists in and of itself? Like, or is it that you have to like define it or like create something that's not already existing in that space?
Can you repeat that?
Like, if you're in a community, is it actually a community? Is it like where everyone comes together to like for a certain cause, or is it just like each person is worried about their own thing? Like it's not a communal space.
Sure. So communities, and I could talk about this for a long time, but we do have a short amount of time. But communities locally, right, are usually defined subjectively, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. At the local level, the city government, just so we understand how geography is dispersed, I guess, through a hierarchy, local governments are, like the city of New Orleans, are responsible for taking care of street addresses and neighborhoods, right? All of our neighborhoods in New Orleans, they're basically defined by the city, and local communities, right? Like, you could have a nonprofit that can design a community and say, this is the boundary of our community, or a community can like exist without boundaries, right? But we're talking kind of like communities that are clustered in space today when we're getting into sort of that subjective conversation. But if we have a nonprofit, we open one right now, and we want to address a specific community, we could technically just draw circles on maps and design where those communities' jurisdictions are, more or less, using a broad term. So I'll explain this in a second, but it's good that that came up, because the federal government is going to create, through the Census Bureau, geographies that go very, very large to, say, the whole United States, states, counties, and parishes, census tracts, block groups, blocks, and streets. I do have examples of all of those here, but I don't think we have enough time to get into a whole lecture on all of that. Regardless, they're very standardized. They all have ID numbers that can be linked to all of a bunch of different type of census data, right? So that we can then stratify and understand how different communities are being affected at different places. And I do have some examples of those as well. But again, on the local level, things get very subjective, right? So the federal government doesn't have any say on how neighborhoods are drawn throughout New Orleans. They have to do that, right? So we, as researchers and as community members and people who want to enrich the community and make them safer and more resilient, we have to know how to break a city down and basically look at it as an organism, right? Which I'll talk about that in a second. Anyone else? Did I see another hand over here somewhere before we? Okay, so moving forward, I want you to name a social problem that is rooted in inequality that can exist here in New Orleans. So I think that might have been up your alley here. Can you think of anything more specific? Because yours was kind of specific, getting to something like this.
Well, flooding, hurricanes, weather.
Okay, so flooding and weather. Okay, flooding is a really good one. Anyone want to add anything else? Yeah.
Disability access.
Okay, disability access is another good one.
Roadway rebuilding, like
Yeah.
I believe like the 2 instances that happened, I believe within 2 weeks, the pipeline burst in multiple areas, and same as well as how some of us, I believe, we don't have any access to water.
Right. Perfect. Yep.
The underdevelopment of the east,
The what? Sorry.
like the underdevelopment of the east.
Okay.
Food insecurity.
Food insecurity is a good one. I have an example of that coming up. Very good. Okay, good. So a lot of good examples here. I'm going to stick with flooding just for now because it's sort of an environmental hazard that we have zero control over. I mean, we do a little bit, but rain falls, the ponding begins. When we have elevation and slope, as elevation rise and slope goes like this, the water's going to run off and it's going to puddle and pond in certain areas. We know that sort of that mid-city area is what they call like the fishbowl kind of, and that's where it really dips in and a lot of water stays. But if we have any kind of flood mitigation projects that we can put out there, maybe more catch basins, maybe it's just the cleaning of catch basins and stuff like that, or road repairs and certain things, whoever was talking about roads, we would want to really break a city down and be able to identify where all of these pockets are of demographics, which we can do with the Census Bureau, okay? We have access to total population, race, economic factors such as median household income, poverty, food stamp recipients. Disability access is actually a really good one as well, because New Orleans, the built environment in New Orleans is very eclectic, to say the least. So, you know, if some areas are addressed a little bit more, the buildings, the sidewalks, than others, we would want to know why, right? So I wrote down here that a safe community is one in which public safety, health, environmental stability, and social well-being are collectively supported through coordinated efforts across disciplines such as law enforcement, public health, urban planning, environmental science, education, and community organizations. In this multidisciplinary view, safety is not defined only by the absence of crime, but by the presence of conditions such as equitable access to resources, which we just talked about, resilient infrastructure, we just talked about, environmental quality, spoke about that too, and strong social networks that allow individuals and neighborhoods to really thrive. Again, thrive is very subjective, but we can all imagine prosperity, moving in the direction that the community wants to move in, whether that's a community that's defined by nonprofits or something like that that wants to be addressed, whether those communities have boundaries, or if they're nested in space. So if we want to address something like, let's stick with food insecurity because we had 2 call outs on that, and I actually have something to work with that. Once we start looking deeper into the concept of where with something like food insecurity, here's a good example of looking at our city, let's say New Orleans, as an organism. Okay, we have just sort of an overview of our neighborhoods here. Who thinks, just by a show of hands, do you think neighborhoods are a good way to operationalize and explore our social problem when we're talking about food insecurity? Raise your hand if you think neighborhoods are a good unit or a good square on a map. Is it big enough? Is it small enough? What do you think?
I think it's a good measurement.
You think it's a good measurement? You don't think it's too big, too small? if we're going to address food insecurity?
Neighborhoods?
I mean,
I think they're perfectly sized.
you think so? Okay.
Maybe a little bit too small, if anything. I don't think too big though.
Okay, good point.
I think it depends on the on like where the neighborhood is, and same as well like how like the neighborhood like so some neighborhoods have like this have certain norms.
Uh-huh.
As well as like in Mardi Gras, like how like some parades were only in through one section while some go through others. But I'd say it depends on like the norms of the neighborhood.
Sure. Right, and the norm that you're talking about is what I mentioned before with the awareness space. We move into a neighborhood and we know we're there. We don't know how we know, but we know. Something changes, right? The context of the neighborhood changes. And they also have different personalities and stuff. So we think that they're an appropriate size, maybe too small. Anybody else want to chime in on that?
I don't know much about GIS, but I would guess that it depends on what you're trying to visualize. Because if it's a grocery store, it's not, which you can't just think about our population of people who have access to transportation pretty readily, but people who don't have access to it. So can they readily walk to a grocery store, get the groceries they need, and then walk back home carrying the groceries in their arms?
I love that.
Mid-city's massive compared to like the Marigny. So it might work in a size like the Marigny, but not another area if you only have one grocery store per neighborhood.
Correct.
And also, at least compared to other places I've lived, there's a lot more variability economically within neighborhoods. Like where I grew up, there's like the so-called other side of the tracks where really was a neighborhood division with pretty sharp economic boundaries. Here it's, millionaires and relatively poor people a block away.
A block away. Very good. So that is a really important point we're going to return to. Did I see a hand over here? Yeah.
I was just thinking too, because it goes to your definition. So if it's walking, these are probably small enough, maybe not. But also in New Orleans, it's like we have our own geographic barriers, whether they're real or mental, about like you wouldn't cross that highway.
Yes.
There's a
Very good.
canal going through there, so you can't actually cross, even though it looks like it's 2 blocks apart. Like it's not.
There's some people who will not cross the river no matter what.
Right.
Right.
That's real though, because that's
That's
traffic.
real.
No, sorry. But those are the other parts I was just thinking about.
Yeah.
They're, on some level, yes, I think doing it by neighborhood makes sense, but if the neighborhoods have the real geographic barriers.
Right. So to stay, yeah.
Also, like, essentially, like, if you take ability to get someplace, because I know, like, here, a lot of people don't have cars.
Right.
Where I grew up, you needed a car
Me too.
to get anywhere.
Sure.
Like, it was a 40-minute drive,
Yeah.
just to get groceries on a highway.
Right.
And here, I could walk 10 minutes.
Right. Did you have your hand up? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that like it's interesting the way that the neighborhoods are broken up because like there are some that are so small, like Iberville's like super tiny.
Yep.
And then like Mid-City Park like are huge.
Yep.
So like that creates just way more variability, and like measurements I guess would be a lot different in like an area that's so small versus a neighborhood that's so big.
Right. Very good. So what Dr. McClellan was saying here is that there's a lot of intervariability within our neighborhoods, right? We can be on one street, and this I don't know if it's exclusive to New Orleans, but it's very prominent in New Orleans, where you know that there's like a millionaire living on this street segment, and then over here it might jump into a whole different tax bracket, right? So neighborhoods are amazing to work with if you're studying a concept that's maybe with 3 or 4 different cities or 5 or 6 different cities. But if we're really specifically looking at New Orleans as the example today, and we're going to stick with food insecurity, with many social issues, we have to get really granular. We have to zoom in because we have to control for these invisible factors, canals, crossing like Claiborne, and all of those different pockets that we work with. Okay, so we can visually stratify a city into smaller segments, much like studying the parts of a living organism. Okay, so just to show examples, I'm not going to get really detailed with this, but we know that these are our neighborhoods. Okay, this is designed by the city of New Orleans, all of these neighborhoods, and they're pretty big, but they can also be very small, depends on how we're looking at it. So the federal government is going to release, or has released, based on the Census Bureau, a bunch of geographies that we can use to sort of break down and get even smaller within our neighborhoods. Because if we're talking about the 7th Ward, there might be food insecurity here, but not so much here. And the distance between here and here is pretty sizable if we're walking, right? So we have counties, just as an example. We have parishes / counties here in Louisiana, just to zoom in. You can see they're pretty large. We have something called census tracts, which will break a city down. This is Denver, Colorado. So that's the whole city, and you can just imagine, and I'll show you an example in a second, live with the shape of New Orleans. You can have a bunch of census tracts within New Orleans. Then going smaller, we have block groups, and then even further, blocks. Okay, so we can get really granular with the stuff we're working with. So if I look here at the block group, something really important, just as sort of for your general knowledge, because it's not common to know this, but the size of those squares represents population density when you're looking at tracts and block groups. So if you look at a map of any city by block group, you're going to notice that the smaller these squares get, the more dense the population is. Does anybody know what the population density measure represents?
The amount of people within a certain area?
Yes, people per square mile, basically. So if you're comparing cities, like with crime or environmental issues, you would look at rates and you would compare it to the area of the city to see the density of crime versus across a whole bunch of different cities. It's the same concept when we talk about population density. We do people divided by square mile. So the Census Bureau basically draws these boundaries out. I think they do it every 10 years for the decennial census. They might do it halfway through if there's a big population change. But basically, the more dense the population gets in the area, you might have a square this big. The next 10 years, it might be looking more like this if there's a lot of migration in that area. Also, cities change, they develop. Gentrification is a thing. It happens. Blocks are basically changes to cities happen is what I'm saying here. So it might look very different. You might have larger squares, and then they might shrink down to smaller squares, meaning that there's just more people there. Blocks usually stay the same. They're very symmetrical, as you can see right across the way. Like we say, walk 2 blocks that way, 3 blocks this way. Okay, and then if we want to get even smaller, depending on what type of environmental issue we're working with, flooding, potholes, anything like that, we can look at street segments. So while those are looking very square, they're actually little lines that run through the city, right? They're just little tiny lines, and you can do something like we call hot streets, which is when you look at Waze and it turns red, that's a hot street. It means there's a lot of something happening there, and in that situation, it's traffic. Okay, so I want to stick to the concept of food insecurity really quick. What do you think a good measure in feet is, I guess, for walking distance? Any idea? I had this figured out at one point, but I have forgotten.
3 feet, I believe.
Huh?
Like 3 feet, I believe.
Oh no, like from your house to the grocery store.
Oh, like
Quarter mile?
Quarter mile? Okay. I think I might actually.
Socially different across areas.
It could be. So this example is actually
Mile or a mile.
quite perfect. Okay, I've actually done this before. So really quick, I just want to showcase something here. I did an analysis with one of our students, Abby T, in the environment program. This was her final project for my class, I think 2 semesters ago, but it was in joint support of a study being done by the law school, the environmental law program. And basically, their director, Marianne Cuffone, was applying for a grant that had to do with food insecurity. But the problem is, and this is actually, I'm happy that this topic came up, because the way that they were defining food insecurity was at the city level. It was a little bit too big, but the problem is that we have all this intervariability within our neighborhoods and within these areas. So what we have here basically was an analysis that was done, and I'm going to replicate it in a second here, where we have a bunch of grocery stores through Central City, and then we stratify the distance from those grocery stores to the, I believe these are property parcels, and that's what I'm going to use in the example in a second. to the grocery stores and whether or not that was walking distance. And then we were also kind of controlling for Claiborne Avenue that goes right through here that nobody really wants to walk across. Couple things about this map here. One, as students, this is a really marketable skill for you to have. About 4 years ago, as I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, all of this type of mapping was locked behind coding, very advanced coding, I think in Java and Python, right? This is completely interactive. You can move it around, you can use this to display information, you can click on these and pop-up windows will come up with a bunch of data and information here, okay? So you can see here, we see some variability, like there's literally a streak of food insecurity here. And we're even controlling for grocery stores that are outside the boundary, as you can see over here. But any analysis that you can do, you can turn it into this interactive web mapping application that is very user-friendly, right? Which is a really powerful job skill to have right now, because mapping your where for whatever your problem is, or if you're building a safer community or trying to make something more resilient, information is key, okay? So I have the main software open here, and just to showcase this, because we were talking about it, we have our neighborhoods in New Orleans, and we can go ahead and transform it here into invisible boundaries, just hollow, and then there are our block groups within all of our neighborhoods right there. Okay, so just so you can see, this is how we can really break a city down and start to really isolate areas within neighborhoods that might be more food insecure than others, okay? So I do have an example here of, give it just a second to load because it is a big file, of property parcels and grocery stores. Okay, so does anybody know what a property parcel is? It's basically the plot of land when you buy a house or a business or anything. It's the actual plot of land, which includes the front yard and the backyard and everything that you own, okay? So if let's zoom in a little bit over here. If we look at these property parcels here, we can kind of see, and then you'll see also here some dots. Those are grocery stores. I can change them to red dots. Right there, so you can see the grocery store is a little more clear. And what we can do now, since we have isolated our social problem, we have taken New Orleans and kind of turned it into a working organism. We have all of the neighborhoods, right? We can turn them back on. Here's Central City, which is what I was just showing you. All the other neighborhoods. So we've broken them down into much smaller segments. So what we can then do is start running analyses here where we select all of the property parcels that are X amount of distance from a grocery store. So what I isolated here for that one study I did in support of the grant was high food insecurity was greater than 2,000 feet from a grocery store, which I have isolated here as pink. 1,500 to 1,999 feet, which would be moderate food insecurity, and then 1,000 feet for low food insecurity. So what I'm going to do right now is I guess I'll select all of the grocery stores that are greater than 2,000 feet. So I'm going to select grocery stores that are within a distance of our parcels. Excuse me, I want to select the parcels within a distance of the grocery stores. And then the distance, I'll just do 2,000 feet for now. Okay, so there's a lot there. Hold on one second.
So that's the blue color?
That's the blue color right here. So there are a lot there. Let's do so we'll do parcels that are within a distance of grocery stores. Let's just do 1,000 feet. So it'll be the ones that are the closest. And then I'm going to come over to the parcel. So it's either less food insecure, but it's mostly what I wanted to.
Screen turned off.
Oh, thank you. There we go. Okay, so these are the grocery stores that are within 1,000 feet, okay, of these areas. So you can see here, the parcels that turned green that I just created, I created a selection from what we were running there. And you can see here that the ones that are in green here in Central City, or in this Central City area in the Lower Garden District, are the areas that are closer to a grocery store. You can then run this analysis over and over and over again by however many distances you want to search, and then you can start really isolating a pattern, which will eventually look like this, where you can make very educated policy decisions or grant applications to really support food insecurity where it's actually happening. So right here in this upper corner of Central City, you're going to see that it's pink, which means that it is very far from grocery stores, and it's also very close to Claiborne Avenue here. So if the grocery stores are on this side, it's going to be even more difficult. It looks like there's one over here, up there, and over there. So they're very, very isolated in that pocket. So that's a really, really good example of how we can move from a very broad bird's eye view and get more granular. And when I say granular, I mean small, and that we're zooming into the problem. So whenever you're working on a community problem, trying to build some kind of safer community, you basically want to get as granular as possible within that community, right? And again, if you can use neighborhoods if you're looking at 5 or 6 or 10 different cities, or you can use counties if you're looking at 15 different states, right? It just depends on what your question is. Did you have your hand up? Oh, okay. So that is about what I have. I have other examples I can go through, but I just wanted to open the floor here for discussion. I did add a lot of discussion into it, but anything else that you'd like to add?
Chris, can I ask something?
Yeah.
How do you control for those abstract barriers like the canals or the Claiborne Avenue and these kind of like data, hard data?
The hard data stuff, you could digitize a file. So when you digitize a file, you basically would be creating a shapefile from scratch, or you can just grab the Claiborne Avenue shapefile. And a shapefile, just for all of those who don't know, is this on a map, the layers on a map. They're what visualize, so the parcels here are a shape file. So you could get the shape file for Claiborne and then run a second query and then dummy code both of them. So if it's more than 200 feet from a grocery store, it gets a 1 in one variable column, and then run another search to see if it's X distance from Claiborne Avenue, for example, gets another dummy code. Then you could add them up. So if they score 2, then you have more struggle in that area, or if it's just 1, less struggle. That make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or you can just do it manually, visually, and then count it. I mean, it depends on how granular your problem is. If you're working with one neighborhood, like with Central City, that's easy. But if we're working with all the neighborhoods and 300,000 parcels, you got to do something with dummy coding, or else you'll be there for 2 years.
Yeah, because I see you had a grocery store that's basically on Claiborne.
Yes.
But some people probably on the other side.
Yes.
Less reluctant to go to that one.
Exactly. Right, exactly. So my gut instinct would be that it should go to some form of dummy coding to be able to score it higher and maybe make an index, like an index of inequality or disproportionate to food insecurity or something like that.
With mapping certain locations on in a certain state or area, and the one thing I'm trying to understand is how does are there multiple ways in how figuring out the map of one certain place to another is easily understandable to understand a crime. Let's say an example, a man was murdered by someone that we find out was a relative of theirs because of a lawsuit or allegation that happened. And the way that they found out about it was one thing, the trail of his route.
Okay. Yeah.
So one way this is useful in crime is that we get to understand a person's routine based on camera footage, and same as well as where they live,
mm-hmm.
especially stuff they use to access certain items.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's something that can be done. What you're talking about very specifically is sort of in the branch of intelligence analysis, right? So when it comes to criminology, we have crime analysis, which basically looks at information within a city, looks at indicators that might increase or decrease different crime patterns, but you're talking more on the individual level. So one person mapping their routes, doing all that. You can do that on GIS. We have this option here called network analysis. That's one way of doing it. We have another thing that has to do with distance mapping and stuff like that, but it's a little bit more, that is like very, very granular, like to the human being, right? And that is possible, and we do that in intelligence analysis too.
But it's more broad. It's more like.
It's more narrow. It's much more narrow. Yeah, because you're really zooming into the one person and all of their habits. So you'd really have to like have, I don't know, a GPS on their car, or you'd have to like mark where they are with license plate readers and stuff like that. So you'd probably, if you wanted to do something like that, have to have some kind of intelligence analyst linked to a real-time crime center so that they can trace things through space and time. It's very complicated, but it is very doable these days. Yeah, interesting.
Hi, are there ways that you can use GIS to show how an environment has an impact on a community?
Sure, yeah. Do you have an example of that? Like,
just like how certain people like in certain environments are more prone, like certain like actual environments are more prone to certain things than people in more different, that have different environmental factors.
yeah,
Are you
sure.
thinking like pollution affecting asthma rates or things like that?
Yes, that is actually very, very, very possible. I've had a bunch of students do projects on that in Cancer Alley. Would you say flooding would fall into that question as well?
Yeah.
Because I do have an example of some flooding data here as well. So I also have a digital elevation model that I work with a lot. It's LiDAR data, which is very sophisticated. Here, this is what it looks like, just in black and white. So LiDAR data is very sophisticated data that they usually put the device on the bottom of an airplane. They'll fly it over an space of land, shoots millions of lasers a second, traces how long it takes to get to the floor, and then the distance back to the device. And it can delete tree canopies, right? So there's a really great, can't get too into this right now, but there's a great documentary, I think it was on Disney Plus at one point, where they used LiDAR data they did a huge multi-million-dollar flyover on the Amazon, and they just erased the tree canopy and found a whole bunch of structures that had never been discovered before. So that's the data we're looking at here. So environmental factors, let's say elevation and flood risk, we can look at right here. Obviously, this is in black and white, so it doesn't make a lot of sense. So we can classify it, and we can make it down to, let's do 12 classifications, and we'll change the color scheme to something a little bit more diverse. Let it load because it's big data. Here we go. So we can see here that the greener, or the closer to, sorry, that's actually great. You can see very vast differences in this elevation. So red, the closer you get to red, the higher the elevation is. If you didn't know this, the closer to the river you are, the higher above sea level you are. So when it gets down into that dark purple, we're looking at -9 to -28 feet below sea level. And then red, which is a lot of buildings and stuff sometimes, is like 26 plus feet above sea level. So yes, you can use GIS to break down a lot of different environmental factors and how it affects a community. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
And you can do that with air pollution. There's a ton of data on particulate matter, 2.5, I think, and a bunch of stuff like that that you can interpolate, which is a scientific way of sort of spreading smaller points across other larger parts of continuous surfaces like land, and then you can link that to communities as well. So if I wanted to look at what neighborhoods, had the most flood risk here, you can see that the east has a lot of flood risk. The mid-city area is very purple, the Lakeview area very purple, and then the closer down here you get to Uptown and following the Mississippi up this way, the elevation gets a lot higher. So yes, tons of different examples that you can do that to link environmental factors, risk, positives and negatives to human communities as well.
Is
Yeah.
this the,
It's all right. I'm just trying to help you.
Is this the LiDAR study that was done to create our flood elevation maps that are in current use?
I think
for our
so.
flood insurance?
I'm
Okay.
pretty positive
looks
this is it.
similar.
Do you know when they did that flyers? Was it like 2020 maybe? Around there?
It came out around 2020, yeah.
Yeah,
when
I
it was-
think that's the data. I'm pretty positive that is the data, yes. Mhm. Because you can have, just to provide context for this since we're talking about it, a digital elevation model is anything that will show data like this, okay, at the small points of contact of where the lasers hit, but also you can do it with satellite imagery, and they do that with light reflection. And then they can measure the distance of the light reflection, but it's just a little bit, it's not less accurate, it just has to take bigger pictures because it's from so high up in space, right? And that's something called, and we can't get into the weeds on this, that's something called spatial resolution. So if you have just like a JPEG image on your computer or your phone, what happens when you zoom in really, really close? It gets blurry, it gets pixelated. So spatial resolution from satellite imagery or even with digital elevation like this has to do with those pixels and how large they are. So when we take pictures of the Earth from a satellite, the spatial resolution is going to be probably like this big on a map, which could be 1,000 by 1,000 meters or something like that, or 2,000 meters. LiDAR data is so important because those pixels are much smaller within a city. Give it a second to load. You see, so those pixels are a lot smaller, and if I click on one of the pixels, oh no wait, the neighborhoods are going to get in the way, hold on. So if I click on one of those pixels, it's going to show me the pixel value, which is -8. So whatever little pixel I just clicked on, which is probably, I think, a 10 by 10 pixelated meter, maybe 50 by 50, I'm not sure. No, it's got to be smaller than that, is -8 feet below sea level. And then what we can do is basically transform all of those squares into points, and then we can get a little bit more specific in running calculations and stuff like that. So that's just kind of to explain how digital elevation models work and stuff like that with the pixels. I think that's pretty valuable knowledge to know about satellite imagery just on a general basis. Yeah.
I heard from some of my students that you're about to be teaching a course that starts soon.
I am, yes. Starts on the 16th. It's in wildlife crime, actually, so I'm blending concepts of contemporary place-based theories of crime into the topic of wildlife crime, parrot poaching, a whole bunch of different topics that we'll be going through, and there will be a GIS element to it. The class is hybrid, so it'll be half in person, where we'll be talking about theory and doing a lot of practice, and then the second part will be video tutorials, and they're mostly going to be browser-based. Okay, so anyone can do it, whether you have a Mac or anything from home, and the class is motivated by the individual who taught me, one of my professors who taught me GIS, who specializes in wildlife crime. And before the pandemic hit, I was supposed to actually work with that same person on doing some kind of analysis on redwood burl poaching. So I want to try to get into different types of poaching and things like that in the class. And burls are those big tumors that grow on trees. I don't know if any of y'all want to chime in on that, but for redwoods, they're very big, and they cut them with a chainsaw, and they make tables out of them and stuff, which is technically considered poaching. So yeah, so the class is going to be pretty interesting on that. Yeah.
I wanted to talk to you a little about what skills you think that students need to come into this class. One of the things I've seen lately is maybe a deficit in the ability to work with data within spreadsheets.
Yes. Okay. That's a very good question. For wildlife crime class and the GIS Loyola core class we have here, the Intro to GIS/Geospatial Crime Analysis, you need no prerequisites. I teach you how to do everything in the class itself. But I think just for students in here who are wanting to get more into GIS work, whether that's taking the class, getting a job, maybe expanding on your personal research for a capstone or just general interest or for a job later on, because it is an applied skill that would have a lot of different options for you, is to learn how to just work with data in something like Excel, right? We have Google Spreadsheets now, we have other platforms like SPSS, but when you're cleaning data, working with data, and trying to articulate things, the industry standard is Excel, and technically they all kind of work the same way. So if you learn Excel, you'll be able to carry over whatever different software you end up using, right? So I would very much recommend getting your hands dirty, per se, with different types of spreadsheets. And it doesn't have to be super advanced. Just knowing how to copy paste, knowing how to set filters, knowing how to make a pivot table, things like that can really go a long way for you, like a long, long way. Yeah.
Do you have space in your wildlife party house?
I think it's full. I'm not sure. I haven't looked at Laura for a while, but I think it's full.
Okay.
But we could check after. Yeah.
Any other questions? For those, since that one is full, your next one will be the intro class in the fall?
Yes, so I teach the fundamental Loyola Core GIS class every fall and every spring in person. I have been doing it sometimes in the summer, and I did run it on a J term, but the J term and the summer class are online, so you're not going to get as many of the carryover skills, but it's still very valuable because you're learning the web-based version of this, which is very popular in the job market today too. So there's a lot of benefit. I will accept an independent study to take the class. If you took the class for the online version, I'll accept an independent study to do the in-person version as well, if you're interested.
Oh, I saw, you mentioned poaching. I saw Scientific American Online like a month ago about a high school student who came up with an AI trick to help identify the best places to look for poachers. I think it was in Africa, but I don't know if that rings a bell. Or
I haven't heard of it yet, no. I'll definitely look it up though. Yeah, that's great.
All right, well, I want to say thank you again, Dr. Torres, for joining us.
Of course.
This is our second one. We have a third roundtable coming up during Earth Week, which, don't be confused, Earth Week isn't 1 week this year. It is over a Wednesday to a Wednesday, right? Am I right?
Yes.
Where's Kimberly when I need? Thursday to Wednesday, sorry. Right. I was like, I wish we had the thing to pull up right now, but we were not that clever. So stay tuned for that. And we will have Joey Bro, who is the Assistant Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife and some other government agencies. There's a couple under him now, and the watershed, the person that's over the Small Watershed Initiative for the state of Louisiana. So we're really looking forward to that one as well. So thank you. This concludes it, and we'll be up front if you want to come up and say anything.
There you go. I'll put the calendar up here.
Oh, thank you.